presenting my PhD thesis titled Modeling Prosumer Behavior in the Smart Grid and Implementing Privacy Design in IoT. Okay. In this presentation, I will give you a brief introduction about smart cities and two of its subcomponents. The second section is assigned to describe an experimental design for simulation of an energy market and presenting our frameworks based on expected utility theory to model a smart grid customer's behavior, and also introducing the notion of time window to extend the base model. Next, I will present modeling prosumer behavior using prospect theory and how we can enhance its performance. In the final part, I will present implementing traffic shaping mechanisms in practical setup in which the mechanisms aim to improve privacy in IoT systems and networks. And I'll explain the design frameworks for utilizing these shapers in real-world scenario, and also outline some technical challenges. A smart city is a title to a city that incorporates information and communication technologies to enhance the quality and performance of urban services. In order to reduce resource consumption, wastage, and overall costs. The smart cities include a diverse set of infrastructures that are utilized in every aspect of its residents' lives. These infrastructures range from communication to transportation to utilities such as power. The interaction of these ecosystems of machine and people is facilitated by the presence of a large collection of devices that form the Internet of Things, or IoT. My thesis addresses two subcomponents that are integral parts of the smart city ecosystem, namely the smart grid and IoT. The smart grid is an evolution of the traditional electric power grid, resulting from convergence of several factors, including growing demand for electricity, a variety of technological developments, environmental imperatives, and security concerns. Unprecedented changes over the past few years in the smart grid have enabled power utility to construct a two-way communication infrastructures for monitoring and management purposes across the power system. The effective operation of such a decentralized system is expected to change the way in which energy is produced and delivered to customers. One of the integral features of the smart grid is active customer participation in the overall energy management process. And we have the new terminology, prosumer, that refers to who can simultaneously produce and consume energy. Typically, prosumers own storage units and renewable energy sources such as wind that can work jointly to produce, store, and consume energy. Usually, the power company acts as a leader who determines the pricing strategy to maximize its profits, while the prosumers act as followers who react by choosing the amount of energy to buy or to sell to optimize their current and future profit. So prosumers not only can consume energy from the power utility, but they can also produce energy to power their own homes and can often generate surplus electricity that can feed back into the grid for an energy credit or sell it at the market price. How prosumers behave in this emerging energy management scenario, their perception, motivations, and decisions will influence the success of the smart grid. For example, how prosumers make decisions about whether and when to sell the surplus energy generated by the solar panels or wind turbines will inform the design of optimal energy management systems. Hence, the question is how to model prosumer behavior in an ongoing market situation. We need a framework or mathematical method to model how prosumers make decisions under uncertainty and risk. Okay. The IoT devices include sensors and software to collect data, exchange information, and take proper actions based on the data. These pervasive devices have been utilized in a broad range of applications from making the smart buildings to establishing a smart grid, which aim to bring convenience and other benefits to the users. As helpful as the IoT system can be, using IoT brings with it several risks and challenges. Since IoT devices collect large amount of information, some public and some personal, and as such pose unique challenges to privacy of the users. The studies show that it's possible to infer private and sensitive information from the traffic pattern, even when the data is encrypted and secure. Hence, unauthorized adversaries with access to the traffic flow of IoT devices can infer sensitive user activities, and these findings motivate considering mechanisms that can improve privacy in IoT systems. Okay, let's move on to part one, prosumer behavior, decision-making with bounded horizon. Our work is based on a conducted study to collect data in a simulated smart grid scenario. So it is necessary to explain how the study was designed and the data was collected. The decision behavior of 57 household decision makers was studied in a simulation of 10-week smart grid scenario. Participants were recruited through an online research participant recruiting service. All of the subjects met a specific criteria. They needed to be homeowner, decision makers in the household regarding energy utility services, and PC, tablet, or smartphone user with access to the internet. And they needed to be committed to participating in this study every day for 10 weeks. All subjects earned a fixed amount of $100 for completing this study. In addition to this fixed amount, subjects kept the profit that they earned by selling their surplus energy during the course of this study. Finally, to further incentivize subjects, the top 3 performers were awarded bonuses of $25, $50, and $100. The framework for the study was a simulated smart grid scenario in which participants acted as prosumers. They were asked to imagine that they had solar panels installed on their property, a battery system to store surplus energy generated by their solar panels, and a means of their surplus energy back to the power company for a profit. Each day, subjects were given the opportunity to sell some or all of their surplus energy that they had accumulated in their storage system. The subject's task was to maximize their profits by selling their surplus electricity when their task was to maximize their profit by selling the unit when the prices were highest. The price paid by the fictional power company for prosumer-generated electricity varied from day to day in a manner that loosely mimicked the variation in a wholesale energy prices. Every day, participants received an email providing them with some information. such as the number of units of surplus energy generated by solar panels, the total number of units stored in a storage battery, the amount of profit had been earned till that day by selling the surplus energy, and the price the power company was paying for a unit of energy on that day. And the email was wrapped up with this question: do you want to sell? If so, how many? Okay, in this subsection, I present two mathematical frameworks for modeling prosumer utility. The goal is to model the utility of prosumer using parameters such as the offered price on a day, the number of energy units that a prosumer has available for sale, and the probability of forecast prices. In response to this, prosumer decision-making is studied in a natural market situation in which a prosumer has to decide every day whether to sell any surplus energy units generated by the solar panels on her roof or hold the energy in anticipation of a future sale at a better price. In this way, prosumers are engaged in an energy market in which they must make a series of non-independent decisions over an extended period of time. From a methodological perspective, this study measures the behavior of prosumer in a realistic smart grid scenario, and from modeling perspective, it considers the effect of subjective time frame within which a prosumer operates when making decision about whether to sell any surplus energy in an ongoing market. We proposed our mathematical framework for the prosumer's utility and the cutoff price using expected utility theory, or EUT. EUT is a conventional game theoretic notion that is guided strictly by objective notions of gains and losses, play rationality, and conformity to predetermined decision-making rules that are unaffected by real-life perceptions of benefits and risks. However, EUT has often been found not to accurately account for how people respond in real-life situations. Next, because of the drawbacks, we have an extension of the classic EUT to EUT with a time window. EUT with a time window is a new behavioral model that extends EUT to take into account the notion of bounded temporal horizon. And this new behavioral model assumes that prosumers make decisions that will affect their lives within a bounded time window, regardless of how far into the future their units may be sold. For modeling the system, we should consider that prosumer participants in our power grid scenario have to make a new decision every day regarding whether to sell some, all, or none of their surplus energy units to a central utility at the price offered by the utility. To make this decision, they must assess the probability that they would receive a higher payoff in the future for those units if they choose not to sell them today. So expected utilities are computed for sell and hold decisions, the components of which are the gain realized from selling and the potential gain from not selling. So expected utility of selling a unit of energy on day D at price ID has two components. The first component is the gain realized by selling the unit at price ID on day D, and the second component is the possible gain that may be realized by holding the unit on day D and selling on a subsequent day. And this possible gain from holding is determined by the probability of selling at a higher price on a subsequent day, which is determined by the cutoff price on each subsequent day and the probability of it being met or exceeded by the price on offer on that day. In our model, the unit cutoff price is the lowest price on day D, for which the gain from a sale on that day is greater than the expected gain from a hold on that day. And the expected gain for a hold on day D is defined recursively over all the remaining days. So if EUT is considered as a model of decision-making, then the optimal strategy of selling on each day is to choose the number of units of energy that makes the expected utility of prosumer maximized. We proved that EUT model always predicts either selling all available units or nothing. And this prediction is independent of the cutoff prices and the probability of daily prices. In the bounded horizon model, a prosumer may compute the probability of selling at a higher price over a fixed number of days called a time window until near the end of the study, when the remaining days are fewer than the number of days in prosumer's time window. The same as the previous model, the expected utility of selling a unit of energy has two components. The first component is the gain realized by selling the unit at price ID on day D. And the second component is the possible gain that may be realized by holding the unit. But here, EUT with a time window may compute the expected utility for a smaller number of days than is used by EUT. In this framework, the cutoff price is the lowest price for which the gain from a sale is greater than the expected gain from a hold for a time window of tau days. And the expected gain for a hold on day D with a time window of tau is defined recursively over the tau days. Again, here, if EUT with a time window is our mod, if EUT with a time window is considered as a model of decision making, to find the optimal strategy of selling, we need to maximize the expected utility of prosumer maximized. We proved that EUT with a time window model always predicts either selling all available units or nothing. And this prediction is independent of cutoff prices and the probability of daily prices. Also, the frequency of selling in EUT with a time window is greater than EUT. The table on the left shows the cutoff price as a function of the number of days remaining in the study. And as shown in the table, the cutoff price necessarily declines as the study approaches its end. And the figure on the right shows the cutoff price as a function of both time window and number of days remaining in the study. As the figure demonstrates, for this study's parameters, EUT with a time window becomes EUT for time window greater than 30 days. These figures show for each model the mean deviation between the number of units predicted to be sold and the number of units actually sold by a participant. Each of the 57 participants is represented in the figure by a pair of marks, one for average deviation of their data from EUT prediction and the other for average deviation from the EUT with a time window prediction with the best fit of model parameter tau. The mean percentage of improvement of EUT with a time window is more than 30% over EUT. On the top, participants are ordered on the x-axis according to the number of days on which they sold at least one unit from the lowest number of sale days to the highest. And at the bottom, participants are ordered on the x-axis according to EUT results. This figure shows histogram distribution over participants for the size of the best fitting time window. The frequency within which our participants made sell decisions demonstrates that most participants adopted a time window over which the probability of gain was computed rather than using the remaining days in the study to compute the gain from a hold. Only 16% of the participants were best fit by a time window ranging from 31 to 68 days, which is the range consistent with EUT. And data from 84% of the participants were best fit using a time window shorter than 31 days. And a great majority of those appearing to use time windows of less than 9 days in determining whether to sell or hold in a 10-week study. Using another metric, these figures show for each model the proportional deviation between the number of units predicted to be sold and the number of units actually sold by a participant. In this case, the mean percentage of improvement of EUT with a time window is about 43% over EUT. Again, on the top, participants are ordered based on the sale days, and on the bottom, they are ordered based on EUT results. This figure shows the histogram distribution over participants for the size of the best fitting time window when we use proportional deviation. In this case, just 7% of the participants were best fit using a time window in the range of EUT, and 93% were best fit using a time window shorter than 30 days in determining whether to sell or hold in a 10-week study. Given the parameters defining this study, EUT predicted the sell decisions on only 4 days of the study, while many participants sold much more frequently than EUT predicted. And adding time window parameter to EUT allows for a better fit to our participants' selling behavior. The results show that the concept of time window could be essential to the understanding of ongoing markets, including the energy market. Both models, and one important takeaway is both models predict that our prosumers should always sell either none of their units or all of them. And this should be addressed. Part 2, prospect theory with bounded temporal horizon for modeling prosumer behavior in the smart grid. So based on the last conclusion of first part, we need to define a model that can predict some but not all selling decisions. The Nobel Prize winning prospect theory provides a psychologically accurate description of the decision making under uncertainty and risk. And we show that prospect theory can help to predict some but not all selling decisions, and it also provides a more accurate and closer description of prosumer decision making than do EUT-based models. We also enhance the PT-based behavioral model by taking into account bounded horizons that prosumers implicitly impose on their decision-making in arriving at hold or sell decisions of their energy units. The extended behavioral model assumes that in addition to the framing and probability weighting effects imposed by classic PT, prosumers make decisions that will affect their lives within a bounded horizon, regardless of how far into the future the units might be sold. Okay, let's first outline the typical formulation of PT. Instead of being uniformly risk averse over all outcomes, people behave differently on gains and losses, and they are more sensitive to losses than to gains. So losses loom larger than gains, and thus PT provides one transformation that maps objective utility functions into so-called subjective value functions over the possible outcomes, which is concave in gains and convex in losses, and can be controlled by risk aversion, risk seeking, and loss aversion coefficients. This is called framing effect, and the top figure demonstrates an example of one typical S-shaped PT value function. Also, PT studies have shown that most people overweight low probability outcomes and underweight high probability outcomes. That is called weighting effect, which represent people's tendency to subjectively weight uncertain outcomes. The bottom figure shows an example of weighting function known as product function. And this mapping is controlled by a parameter gamma, which quantifies the level of subjectivity in which gamma equal to 1 represents the fully rational case. In our PT model, the expected gain from selling n units at price ID is determined by considering both probability weighting and framing effects. If n units were sold on day D, then the probability that they would be sold at a lower price on a subsequent day over all possible lower prices is multiplied with the corresponding gain in prices and then framed by variable alpha and weighted by the variable gamma. Similarly, the expected loss from selling n units at price ID is determined by considering both the probability weighting and framing effects. If n units were sold on day D, then the probability that they would be sold at a higher price on a subsequent day over all possible higher prices is multiplied with the corresponding loss in prices and then framed by variable beta and weighted by the variable gamma. In this framework, the lowest price for which a sale of 1 unit on day D yields a positive expected utility is called the cutoff price. And if PT is considered as a model of prosumer decision-making, then the optimal strategy of selling on each day is to choose the number of units of energy that makes the expected utility of prosumer maximized. In the bounded horizon model, with prospect theory, a prosumer may compute the probability of selling over a fixed number of days until when the remaining days are fewer than the number of days in prosumer's time window. In this model, the lowest price for which a sale of 1 unit on day D yields a positive expected value is the cutoff price. And to find the optimal strategy of selling, we need to maximize the expected utility of the prosumer. We prove that both models can predict some but not all selling decisions. These figures show the minimum average normalized deviation between the actual and predicted number of units sold for the EUT and PT models. The plots demonstrate that PT model outperform. The plot demonstrates that the PT model outperforms EUT in terms of prediction prosumer behavior. The mean percentage of improvement of PT is about 40% over EUT. on the left, participants are ordered from those who made the fewest number of sale days in the smart grid scenario to those who made the most. And on the right, participants are ordered on x-axis according to EUT results. These figures show the minimum average normalized deviation between the actual and predicted number of units sold for all 4 models. The figures demonstrate that adding the notion of time window to EUT and PT can improve each model's predictions of prosumer decision making in a smart grid with PT with a time window performing best. The mean percentage of improvement of PT with a time window is more than 45% over EUT. And again, participants are ordered from those who made the fewest number of sale days in the grid, and on the left, to those, participants are ordered from those participants who made the fewest number of sale days to those who made the most on the left, and participants are ordered based on EUT results on the right. The left figure shows the size of the best fitting time window for each participant. It can be seen that more than half of the participants, prosumer participants, were best fit by a time window ranging from 1 to 6 days in a 10-week study. And right figure shows the number of sale days predicted by each model and the actual number of days on which each of the 57 participants sold during the course of this study. It also shows from another angle that both PT and PT with a time window have a better fit to the participants' selling behavior than do EUT models. In addition to providing a closer fit to our study data in terms of predicting the number of days on which participants sold 1 or more units, the PT models are also able to predict the observed pattern of selling some but not all units. These 2 figures also serve to validate the last two theorems which state that PT and PT with a time window models can predict selling some but not all available units of energy. The findings led us to the main conclusion that PT-based models appear to provide a closer description of human decision-making than do EUT-based models. And in our energy grid experiment, where a series of related sell and hold decision must be made over an extended period of time, the introduction of bounded time window parameter to the decision model can significantly improve the degree to which model predictions fit actual data. This is true both in terms of predicting which days participants choose to sell their energy units and in predicting whether they sell all or just some of their units. For most participants, a bounded temporal horizon in the range of 1 to 6 days was observed to provide a much better fit to their responses than was found for the traditional EUT-based model, thus validating the need to model PT effects such as probability weighting and framing and bounded temporal horizons imposed in prosumer decision-making. And as we said, PT-based models are able to predict the observed pattern of selling some but not all units. implementing traffic shaping mechanism for privacy improvement in IoT systems and networks. Privacy leakage of Internet of Things has become a great challenge with the popularity of IoT services. For example, snooping on a fully encrypted wireless transmissions of sensors in a smart home let the attackers observe private activities. And this attack just requires timestamp and a set of features of an RF waveform. So controlling the large amount of data from being misused is critical to mitigate privacy risks. Traffic shaping can be an effective method to protect privacy in IoT systems. So we have considered this technique for our real-world scenario. In response to this, we developed an experimental testbed to implement differential privacy measures via traffic shaping mechanisms designed for different optimal criteria. The goal is to fill the gaps exist between theoretical studies and practical implementations, and validate the feasibility of implementation of some traffic shaping mechanisms in real-world testbed, along with evaluating their performance, and also projecting and showing the issues that can be faced in practical setup. The implemented shaping mechanisms aim to change packet send times and sizes based on differential privacy models to make traffic rates uncorrelated with user activities. So the goal is to obfuscate different type of events or user activities by allowing the gateway to manipulate the packet stream. Okay, here is the formal definition of differential privacy. First of all, we need the concept of data sets that differ by at most one record or adjacent data sets. So adjacent data sets are those data sets that are almost identical, but there is at most one different record between them. These are two adjacent or neighboring data sets. So our algorithm or mechanism M gives epsilon differential privacy if for all pair of adjacent data sets, D1 and D2, and every possible output event, S, the probability that we see S when the data set is D1 is almost the same as, or is at most, e to the epsilon times the probability that we see S when the data set is D2. So the ratio of these two probabilities is at most e to the epsilon. For all pairs of data sets, the same inequality would hold if we swapped the rules of D1 and D2. So when epsilon is 0, these two probabilities have to be the same. So when you have 0 probability loss, you also get 0 information about the data set. So epsilon is our measure of privacy loss. The controlled emulation experiments were performed on Sandbox 4 of Orbit. We set up an IoT network topology, as shown in the figure, using SP4, in which a set of nodes represent IoT devices, a gateway, and a server. The nodes acting as IoT sensors are connected through wireless interfaces to the gateway, and the gateway communicate to another node acting as a server through Ethernet interface. So the received packets at WLAN interface of the gateway were processed by the implemented mechanism, and the modified packets were sent to the server through Ethernet interface. The prototype of each shaper was implemented in the gateway using click modular router, which is a software architecture for building flexible and configurable routers. For each of the shaping mechanism, the system was fed by the vectors of input and output packet sizes and the corresponding optimized distribution of output sizes. Also, we needed the smallest time interval between the consecutive packets. We need recorded data. We used recorded data from 3 commercially off-the-shelf IoT devices to evaluate the performance of each mechanism. We included Nest security camera, Belkin Wemo switch, and a smart LG TV. Okay, the first implemented shaper based on theoretical design is DPS. The differential private shaper guarantees packet size epsilon S differential privacy and packet timing epsilon T differential privacy, for which differential privacy measure holds for all packet size, packet timing adjacent streams, and it guarantees to disguise the packet sizes and timing information. In response to, in this approach, every T, that is the smallest time interval between consecutive packets, the shaper generates a packet of size D based on conditional probability distribution. So if we have a packet arrival of AI in WLAN interface, the shaper randomly chooses the size DJ with probability Cij and push it to the Ethernet interface. In this scenario, A can be either 0 if the system receives no packet, or it can be equal to the size of the received packet. At departure time, if the buffer size is less than D, then the shaper used padding technique to make a packet of size D. The second shaping mechanism is PPS, that only alters the sizes in the event packet stream with no change of timing information. The PPS mechanism is a special case of DPS where epsilon S is 0 and epsilon T is infinity. PPS shaper sends a packet only when there is an arrival in the time period of T. Otherwise, it stays inactive and waits for the next period. So when the system receives a packet, then size D will be sampled IID from the optimized distribution. In this case, if the size of the buffer is less than D, the shaper pads enough dummy bytes to the output packet to make a packet of size D. The third mechanism based on theoretical design is PST mechanism, is another special case of DPS mechanism with both epsilon equal to 0 that does not allow inferring any information about private user activities. Every T, the shaper sends a packet of size D based on its PMF, and that is independent from packet arrivals in every time slot. Again, if the size of the buffer is less than D, then the output packet is padded with enough dummy bytes to make size D. Okay, let me describe some of the most critical practical challenges in the implementations. The shaping mechanism may result in packet padding with dummy bytes, breaking down or splitting packets, or even merging some packets together. Hence, we had to deploy another mechanism right after the shaper to generate new headers, including Ethernet, IP, and TCP headers for each output shaped packet to make new valid packets for transmission purpose. This obviously imposes additional overhead to the system. Based on the definition of PPS mechanism, the shaper sends a packet only when it receives a packet. So some packets may remain in the gateway's buffer, and the number of packets remained in the buffer depended on output and input packet sizes and the corresponding PMFs. So for us, we had to replay the traces consecutively twice to analyze the shaper's performance completely over that trace. We also had to scale up time interval between consecutive packets to avoid overloading when the minimum interval was less than 40 microseconds. One of the most important steps that was needed to be taken was in the server in order to make a valid communication in the system. The received data traffic in server differs from the original traffic sent by the stations because of the shaping mechanism. So it's necessary to recover the original data in order to have valid transmission and also analyze accurately the performance of the shapers. So we implemented the retrieval mechanism in the server node to recover original sent packets. When server receives the packets, it first strips the new header added after the shaping mechanism, and then while the flow of data gets buffered in an array, the retrieval mechanism starts finding original lengths of the received packets from their primary IP headers. And this process will be repeated for recovering all the next packets. Then the system stops working when the number of bytes buffered in an array is less than the latest extracted packet size or is less than the number of bytes in the header to obtain packet length. In this case, the system waits for receiving the remaining data and then starts working again to check the conditions and resume restoring the packets. Since shaping mechanism introduced overhead and delay to the system, we analyzed the shaping mechanism performance based on these two factors. To evaluate the overhead incurred to the system, we used a metric called relative byte overhead, which is the ratio obtained by the total number of bytes were fed to the shaper to the total number of bytes sent from its output during the time period of T. Each row of the figures show the results for each device. The figures show how the system behaves in terms of percentage relative byte overhead with change of efficiency level, which is the ratio of input byte rate to the output byte rate during time period of T. And we also observe the overhead imposed to the system by the new TCP IP header shown by the dashed line. We observed the trade-off between the transmission efficiency and privacy with the shaping overhead. Also, comparing the left and right columns of the figure shows that PPS shaping mechanism imposes less percentage relative byte overhead than PST. End-to-end delay, or the amount of time it takes for a packet to traverse from a transmitter to a receiver, is a crucial factor that helps us to understand how the shaping mechanism impacts end-to-end delay and how each shaper performs in comparison to other shaping mechanisms. We use the metric relative excess delay per packet, that is the ratio obtained based on one-way delay when a shaper and retrieval systems are deployed, and one-way delay when no shaper is used. Each row of the figure shows the results for each device. These figures show the trade-off between transmission efficiency and privacy with buffering delay. It's observed that DPS shapers can have a better performance comparing to PPS and PSD. This set of figures illustrates the histograms of relative excess delay per packet, which can provide deeper understanding of performance of each shaping mechanism. And we see that I should mention that we have just two middle efficiency levels here to abbreviate the number of figures. These figures show that decreasing transmission efficiency level skews the distribution to the left and decreases the relative excess delay. And in addition, the figure demonstrate that DPS with largest privacy level in comparison with other shapers results in larger number of packets, experience less delay due to the defined trade-off for this mechanism. Okay, we aim to validate the feasibility of implementations of traffic shaping mechanism in real-world scenario. So a complete and thorough framework from sending IoT devices packets to practical implementations of shaping mechanism in gateway and making new header for valid transmission and effective restoring system in server was designed and implemented. We also presented the issues that can be faced in practical setup. These results and findings can be used as a reference for studies in context of IoT privacy. So, before taking questions, I like to take my time. I hope Professor Godrich is in the meeting. So first of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to my advisor, Professor Mandaya, for his continuous encouragement and support, his timely and creative advice during my PhD. I thank my co-advisor, Professor Sarwate. I greatly appreciate all his valuable supports, his professional guidance. I would also like to thank Professor Godrich for being my proposal and dissertation, committee member. My special appreciation to Dr. Mulligan, not only as just my committee member, but also as a wonderful, wonderful collaborator. I thank Professor Glass in RUTGERS psychology department, as the study described in the first part was collected by, was designed and the data was collected by him and Dr. Mulligan. My special thanks to WINLAB, all WINLAB members, especially Ivan Seskar, all the staff, personnel, for their help in making such a professional industry university research center. I greatly enjoyed working in such a professional lab. And last but not least, I have had a tremendous support network, including my fellow lab mates and other friends. And I just wanted to say, without you, this would not have been possible. Thanks to all of you.